Welcome, everybody, to the Gimmick Infringement podcast. I am Brad Winchester, and with me is my tag team partner, Tyler McDowell-Blanken. Tyler, how are you today?
Brad, I'm doing well, man. I'm excited. This is episode 1 of Gimmick Infringement. Happy to be here. Excited to hear your thoughts on all these topics we have to cover.
And we have a lot to cover, but before we get to any of that, I think we should talk about what the podcast is. We decided to actually do a podcast with what we were doing every day of every week anyway, which is talk about professional wrestling. This came around a few weeks ago when we had an idea, and now we are part of 19 Media Group doing a wrestling podcast.
Yeah, well said, Brad. It's funny. We worked together for several years, and I don't think it's until maybe a year or two ago when we both really shared our love of the business with each other. And I think our friendship sort of skyrocketed from there, not to be too sappy. But yeah, exactly. We're just recording what you and I would be doing every week with or without a podcast. So excited to share this moment with you and with all of our listeners.
Likewise. It started during the pandemic. I had, probably like many of you that'll listen to this podcast, fallen out of love with professional wrestling around 2001, 2002, right after the end of the Monday Night Wars, when it became a little less interesting and all of us sort of became of a certain age, went off and did our own thing. And then during the pandemic, I had time on my hands, and you and I were talking about the Attitude Era. And I hopped onto the network and rewatched basically everything I've ever watched from the past, fell in love with it, and got to watch pay-per-views for the first time and realized, hey, this is still around. This is still a thing. And lo and behold, there's AEW. There's another war coming. And now it's October of 2021, and we have Friday Night Wars again. Tyler, what was that got you into professional wrestling to start with?
Oh, Brad, that's the $1 million question. No pun intended. I was maybe 4 or 5 years old when I first was introduced to the business from my dad. I don't remember the exact pay-per-view or which show, whether it was WCW or WWF at the time, but my earliest memories were having the Raw is War bed sheets when I was a kid. And just watching the Monday Night Wars, man, I can vividly remember watching Goldberg just destroy dudes every week, 50-0, 100-0, and then contrasting that with Mankind and other happenings on Vince's program. So early on, introduced by my dad, and really with Stone Cold and The Rock, and like I said, Goldberg, these really larger than life figures. The love started there, and like you said, now I think with the pandemic, unfortunately, having all that extra time on our hands, you really have time to go into a deep dive with all the content that's available. So yeah, like you, the past 2 years, I think my love has just been reinforced, and I just love it, man. It's the best, right? There's nothing better than pro wrestling.
Yes, I guess it was in high school. I got into theater and performing arts, and I never made the connection between pro wrestling and theater until recently, actually, when I'm like, what is it about it that's so appealing? Because I love sports and I love acting, and never put it together that I'm getting to watch a bit of both. And it just makes it so much fun. It's also a live show. You don't get that with a scripted weekly fictional serial. Is it fixed? Yes. Is it planned? Yes. Do they have everything mapped out? Sure. Who cares? Because the audience is still involved and stuff happens. Sometimes people will start whipping batteries into the ring because it's ECW and everybody in this little bingo hall is hammered. Or it's GCW and nobody likes Matt Cardona and they're pissed he won the title. So they're throwing beer bottles and everything at him while he's bleeding from broken glass. You don't know what's going to happen. A crazy fan is going to rush the stage for a Jericho MJF interview where Chris Jericho ends up hauling off and punching a guy in the face for trying to get up onto the stage, and that becomes part of the show. I love that anything can happen live element to it. For me, it was growing up watching WWF for the most part until junior high, high school, when it was mostly junior high, I think, when it was like you watching Goldberg destroy everybody and then not really understanding math at all. How 1 week later he's up 35 wins.
Yeah. Shout out to house shows. Gotta love a good house show.
Yes.
Many house
yes,
shows.
where he's doing 5 house shows a day, wrestling 3 matches at a time. But yeah, it was still a lot of fun. The war was fun. The strangeness of ravishing Rick Rude showing up on both shows in the same night was really weird. But it was must see television. I mean, they were doing like 10 million people, 9 million people, 8 million people consistently. Everybody was watching it. I couldn't go anywhere without seeing an NWO shirt.
Right.
But for me, it was Mean Gene doing interviews on Saturday mornings to set up whatever it was. I don't know if we were getting reruns. I can't even remember what I was watching. I just remember being in the living room with my brother and watching Mean Gene Okerlund interview all of these great wrestlers. It's like being in awe of Hulk Hogan, which, now that shine is gone. Watching him interview Macho Man Randy Savage and seeing the Junkyard Dog and Bret the Hitman Hart, and then my brother putting me in a sharpshooter or in a figure 4, which always was terrible. But just having that time to sort of bond over that, and I'm kind of mad at myself for missing all of that time where I could have been enjoying this product. But I also think it was one of those things where even now I'll say like, yeah, I love pro wrestling, and people look at me like, really? It's fake? And I'm like, bro, yeah, I see you watching Hallmark movies. You're going to tell me that's real? Like you like what you like.
Right.
And I love this stuff. It's so entertaining. And these athletes are incredible.
Yes. Yeah. I think you nailed so much of what's resonated with me and hopefully a lot of our fans out there. The blend of storytelling, as you mentioned, your theater background, with athleticism. So I am someone who loves sports, particularly basketball, and anything can be on that sports on the TV and I'm going to watch. So like you said, with these athletes in all of these various companies, especially in 2021, the matches that these performers, these wrestlers can put on is just incredible. I think decades ago was just sort of more about the spectacle, and you mentioned Hulk Hogan. This will probably be the only podcast you mentioned Hulk Hogan. Hopefully, knock on wood. Seeing him body slam someone, pose, Hulk up, give a leg drop, that was what people really enjoyed decades and decades ago. But now more than ever, it really is an athletic-based competition. So you add the athletic aspect plus the storytelling, and as you mentioned now, performers showing up with different companies, and it's a beautiful thing, man. I agree with you. I fell off as well. I would say around high school age. I took a few years off from it. This was early, or not early. This was 2010s, end of CM Punk's reign, and I think it was a mix of the product wasn't very exciting to me at that time. TNA wasn't what it used to be, and WWE wasn't what it used to be, in my opinion. And like you said, you just priority shift, and maybe you feel some slight judgment from friends or people in your life. Like, really, dude, you're still watching this? And yeah, I went away, and then NXT, the original NXT, not the sci-fi NXT. When I say original, I'm talking about the Sasha versus Bailey, early Charlotte, Kevin Owens, even before Kevin Owens, the Bo Dallases and Adrian Neville's, now known as Pac. That's what really got me back into it. And like you said, I think wrestling is in such a healthy place right now. And as we're going to talk about in a moment, there are so many performers crushing it, so many intriguing storylines that blur the lines between what is real and what is not, that I'm so excited to, like I said, jump into these topics with you. And we love professional wrestling, and that's why we wanted to start this podcast.
Yeah, and I think what I'm going to do is give a shout out to Never Meet Your Heroes. Great podcast. Check it out. If you want to hear more Hulk Hogan talk, check out their pod where they talk about Hulk Hogan and all of the reasons you should never meet your heroes.
What a tease.
Yeah, right. let's talk about. I suppose we'll move on to our all-time favorite surprise debuts. You already know what mine is, so I'm going to let you go first.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go. I do know what yours is. That's funny. Yeah, that's yes, yes. I'm gonna say something that's a little more recent, maybe than what our listeners would expect. So I was a big fan of TNA wrestling, as I mentioned, Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. I even was a supporter of the weekly Wednesday pay-per-views they had. My dad, again, shout out to my pops, one of the greatest men on earth. He used to order those weekly shows for us when I was a kid, right? And so every Wednesday, someone would show up, whether it be Sabu or the Sandman, or you just didn't know what you would get, but you knew it would be worth that $10 that you would pay. It's so hard to believe that we pay $10 for these weekly Wednesday shows when now WWE is putting on these spectacles for $5 a month. It's
Right.
it's wild, but I'm not gonna go with Sabu or Sandman. I'm actually gonna go with Christian Cage. When he showed up in TNA, I was so excited, Brad. When I tell you, I was I think they called Christian's fans peeps back in the day. I was a total peep. I would do the kill switch to my dad in our living room when we would have our fights. I would bring out the ladder. But Christian going to TNA really stands out to me because this was a guy that definitely got a push in WWE, but was never the face of the company. And at that time, for whatever reason, when he made that switch, that's really, I think, what solidified TNA as being a potential competitor to WWE. Granted, they ended up getting squashed by WWE, and TNA Impact has had a bit of a tumultuous run over the last 2 decades. But man, when Christian appeared there, I loved it so much. Gail Kim ended up making that transition as well. And then the second debut I would point to was Sting coming to WWE at that Survivor Series pay-per-view. Brad, when I tell you, I had to get up off the couch when he made his debut. That is a moment, and I'm a big Sting fan. Going back to WCW, particularly the Crow Sting, when
Yes.
he showed up in WWE, that was a moment where I really felt rewarded as a longtime wrestling fan. I never thought I would see the day. I don't know how well he was booked after that initial appearance, but I love Sting and I really love TNA. I know that's a very niche response, but Sting and then those TNA debuts really stuck with me, man. I want you to share your response with the viewers though. I know who you got.
So I really think that I don't think you're underselling TNA. TNA at its peak was incredible. It was you had the Octagon, you had all of these crazy matches, you had incredible talent that we can still see today. AJ Styles, all these Samoa Joe, all these guys that have gone on to do other things or came from the WWE or back in the WWE or are in AEW doing things there that I think are probably they're used better there, even if they're not used a lot, than they probably would be anywhere else at this point. Yeah, I'm a little bit jealous because I've gotten to see these, but I already knew they were coming. So I've been able to go back and watch all of these debuts. I've only had a couple here with AEW, but I will say a call up is fun to watch if it's not teased from NXT. But it's not even close. It was Y2J.
That's right.
Getting to live through Chris Jericho and the tease for months of the countdown to the millennium and going to school and going like, wait a second, the math doesn't add up. It said it was this many hours. That's like in 2 months. That's the middle of the summer. That doesn't make any sense. So how could this possibly be the millennium? What's going to happen? Is somebody showing up? Is something happening? And I had no idea. I thought they wrote Jericho off because Goldberg killed him outside of the ring at one point in WCW after months of Chris Jericho coming out and taunting Goldberg. And I desperately wanted that match to happen. I would have given all of my savings, which would have been just enough to cover the pay-per-view, to actually see this pay-per-view. I would have loved that moment, but it never happened. It was always, let's put this guy that way